Everyone, this is Elon with the Egard podcast, and I'm here with someone who is a multiple time guest on the podcast, Officer Josh Oliveri, who is an active duty police officer. And it's always fun having you on. I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself, what you got going on, your charity, and all that stuff, and we can jump right in from there.
Yeah, no, I'm the active duty police officer. Before that, I worked just south of 5 years in a state prison as a corrections officer. And I've since 2014, I've been a member of the law enforcement charity Brothers Before Others. We're comprised solely of sworn, active or retired police officers from all over the country. It was founded by retired NYPD police officer Mike Burke. We were started as a flower fund. That was our goal from the beginning, was to send a floral arrangement to every line of duty death in the country, which is something that we've kept up with since 2014. But since then, we've kind of branched out a little bit more. We're more of like an action group now. Again, because we do have a lot of retired guys inside of the charity. They tend to have a lot more leeway with what they can and can't say. So we've gotten involved, advocating for police officers. But yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been fantastic. The charity's done amazing stuff. We have a boxing event coming up in November 19th, Turkey Brawl, which I believe there are still tickets available for if anybody's interested. I mean, we're on every form of social media if they just search Brothers Before Others, and then the website is just the name. It's brothersbeforeothers.org, and they can get tickets on there if they're in the Phillipsburg, New Jersey area.
All right, everyone, I would definitely go check out the website for their charity. They do amazing stuff. Brothers Before Others. I'll have the link down below in the description area. So if you want to support police, definitely a great charity to do it. They're very honest. You know where your money's going. It's going to the people who need it. You guys are super ethical. And so I really like that about you guys, because it's hard to know what kind of charities to trust nowadays in anything. You know what I mean? Whether even for police and military, you don't know where the money's going. With you guys, I do know that it's going directly to the people who need it. So anyone out there looking for a police charity to support, and they do need support, definitely the right charity to give money to. So moving forward, I know you saw, I'm going to jump right in. Oi, oi, oi. I could see so you had seen the recent interview I did with Mr. Izzo, Dominic
Correct.
Izzo.
Correct.
And essentially, I know you had a strong reaction to it. And as you know, I really like to give an opportunity for everyone to have a voice, especially anyone who was a police officer, is a police officer, especially on these issues, even if they're not in agreement with each other. And I think that's healthy. I think that's healthy to have those kind of conversations. So Mr. Izzo was definitely critical of police to some degree. On the podcast, I wouldn't say extremely critical, but in other posts, yes, that I didn't know about. So I'd like to talk about your views on kind of the general approach to, that tragic shooting of Eric Cantu that happened, and you'd said something interesting to me. So I'll allow you to have your take on it and your time now to kind of rebut.
It's not even so much a rebut, as much as just trying to give a clear perspective for people that heard the babble that came out of his mouth. Again, I'm an authority on nothing. While Dominic spent the first couple of minutes of your interview with him touting himself and listing all of his qualifications and some of the things that he views as qualifications, ironically, is it being fired. I'm not going to do that. I'm not an authority on anything. I have a 16-year unblemished career, on top of the 5 years in the prison, which was unblemished. I've been active during that time, so I haven't been a traffic cone just standing there. So, it is something I take pride on, but that doesn't make me an authority on anything. I mean, to my, I guess, credit or discredit, I'm not sure which it is, and probably disappointing to him. I had never really known who the heck this guy was before I saw the video that you had posted. To me, he looks a little bit like a Guy Fieri meets Steven Seagal meets Dale Brown from that Detroit urban survival training thing. Like, who the heck is this guy? And if I'm looking for an authority on law enforcement, it's safe to say it's not going to start with somebody who was fired from law enforcement, regardless of whether the fact he had to sue to get his job. Again, I didn't know much about him before, and I don't know that much about him now, other than what was presented in front of me, plus a little bit. To give people a context, he had referenced some hate that he gets on social media and in police forums. He called them jokes or whatever. Well, I take exception a little bit to that, because Brothers Before Others is, it is a Facebook based charity. A lot of our interaction between members happens on Facebook. Now, granted, it's a closed group, but it is, I guess you could say, a social media forum. So maybe the ones that he's hanging out on are public forums, which fits his social media platform and his footprint and his clicks and his interaction. But to say that they're all a joke, it's
That's
just
a generalization, obviously.
it's dismissive, right?
But can we just quickly jump into his let's look at the content of what he said on the podcast, then we can jump into kind of, because I do think he had some valid points, which we kind of touched on previously. I do think the aspect of, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. The age of police officers, 21, you don't have real world experience. You're hot-headed, you're full of testosterone. Because I know I was that way at 21. When I heard him say that, I said, that is a fair critique. I could imagine that a lot of the bad things happen with newer, younger, hot-headed police officers.
Yes and no. Bad things happen. A lot of times like the middle ground seems to be the safest, right? Guys that have a little bit of legs under them, but they're not on that fading out phase. They have that experience and they're still locked in. That seems to be the safest, because you'll see a lot of time, not a lot of times, but you'll see often guys with 20 plus years on being involved in critical incidents that either get injured or, God forbid, killed. And that's certainly not from a lack of experience. So what is that? I don't know. Is it a lack of attention, or are they zoning out? Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, again, for a clown, he made a couple of good points, one of which was the age, and I agree with that. And something that you said was beautiful, because I think it marries his point, because the age is nothing really new. You go back not that long ago in law enforcement, cops are getting hired right out of high school. Before law enforcement was a desired job, before the pay was real, before the benefits were real, they were hiring cops right out of high school. So the age is not anything new. What is new was something that you brought up during the interview, where you said, you mentioned guys leaving the force, and I think you had asked him what his thought on, why that was happening. But that's a very good point, because that is happening, and it's happening. It's like almost to mass exodus levels. So what's having happen now is like a perfect storm. You're still having these young officers come on, which is an issue, and I do agree that the age is a problem. There's a lot of learning, that life learning, right, that happens between 20 and 30. There's a lot of life learning that goes on there, a lot of development as an adult that these guys are missing. Does it mean that they're all unqualified? No, but there's a good chance that they're going to be more emotionally driven. I mean, I don't think that's unreasonable to say. And what's happening is you're losing the experienced guys, the experienced, level-headed, guys that are teaching these kids and taking them under their wing. So you're losing that buffer. So you still have the young guys coming in, and the old guys are leaving now. So there's nobody to buffer that. When you have the young kid go into the job, now you, instead of having a young kid and two seasoned vets, you have 3 young kids going to the job. That's where the problem is coming in. Because again, like I said, the young police officers getting hired, that's not new.
I guess the argument that he made there too, which I somewhat agree with, is that young kids today are different than young kids 10 years ago, and are different. And those young kids 10 years ago are different than young kids 10 years before that. And, that we just don't have the same kind of society and the same kind of responsibility, that even in terms of how we perceive personal responsibility across the board. So I could see that is, especially with what you're talking about, they don't have a proper older figure with experience now in the force to kind of guide them in the same way.
Something, and I forget which one of you said it, but it kind of got dismissed, which really shouldn't. I think one of you had mentioned, whether training was an issue. And again, I forget who brought it up. And
I did, and he said it's not an issue. He said
I think it is. I think it is. I think the cops that are being taught now, and again, it's a byproduct of the society we're dealing with now, and the expectations of police officers, and the desires of performance, and what they're what society's looking for from their cops. The training is cranking out social workers. That's a problem. Mm-hmm. That's a problem. Again, it has its place. I know the topic of verbal judo came up. Great topic. Again, second good point that he made, because it is a tool, and probably one of the most valuable tools a police officer has. Now, do I agree that you hone that skill as a bartender? No. I'm not in the pleasing business, right? I'm not begging anybody for tips. I'm not looking to conduct my interactions so you're happy. I'm looking to conduct my interactions so everybody goes home safe. I'm going to do my job, and I'm going to do it so everybody goes home safe. I don't care if you're happy. I don't need a tip from you. Now, that said, I love the way certain sheriff's departments, if not all sheriff's departments, I don't know enough about them, so I'm not an authority on it, but I like the way how some sheriff's departments run the departments, where you do time in a jail before you hit the street. My time in a state prison, you want to talk about honing your verbal judo skills. Corrections of any kind, working inside of a prison, working inside of a jail, is the hardest part of law enforcement. It is the hardest job under the law enforcement umbrella, and I defy anybody to change my mind. And granted, I'm a little biased because I worked in a jail, but to take all the tools off somebody's belt, lock them in a cage with people that have been convicted of shit. We're not talking about people that, maybe they're guilty, maybe they're not. Well, maybe they're guilty of what they did, and maybe they're not guilty of what they did, but they did shit. They did some. These are not good people. These are people that have been found guilty, have been given their due process, been found guilty, and are in a prison. Lock somebody in a room with 60, 70, 80, 90 of them on bunks, take away all their tools, and say, okay, run that housing unit. You're going to learn a lot about yourself real quick. And that verbal judo, 100% is going to get home. And again, both of you guys are right. Again, I know Dominic had brought it up. He I guess when he started to talk about the Cantu case, he didn't want to talk about anything before. He didn't want to talk about anything after, but all he did was talk about what happened before and what caused the guy to focus on the car and intoxicating authority or whatever the fuck. Sounded like he was on a therapist's couch. He's talking about his perspective and I don't know anything about that intoxicating. I don't have that. I've had 2 cars take off on me in the last week. And I don't drive around looking at those specific cars now and targeting those cars because I'm so frustrated. Calm down, dude. Dude, it's ridiculous. Verbal judo is important. It is a tool. Again, like I said, probably one of the more valuable tools. But I'll tell you something right now. Verbal judo doesn't change Mike Brown when a perp is attacking a cop in his car. Cop didn't even get out of his car. Doesn't chain Mike Brown. Verbal judo doesn't chain Eric Gardner. When the cops tell him, all right, you're under arrest, and a guy 2 times the size of everybody there balls up his fist and says, nah, not today. Verbal judo doesn't change that. Verbal judo doesn't change George Floyd, where you have a guy who just took fentanyl and is now overdosing on fentanyl, a career criminal on fentanyl. There's no verbal judo changing that. And if you watch the full George Floyd video from front to back, the one that, of course, they didn't release till months after the country was on fire, you know, where the cops are inside the store and the store owner is pointing George Floyd out, saying, yeah, that's the guy over there. And the video shows how the cops interacted with the other 2 people that were in the car.
Sure, George Floyd was very, very high. I don't think anyone argues that. He probably would have died from fentanyl anyway. I think the problem in those cases is, you know, did Officer Chauvin need to put his knee on his neck for 9 minutes? No. I mean, and I guess again, that's kind of where I would, if any police officer looks at that and goes, he did nothing wrong, to me, that's a defensive response, because he did do, in my opinion, he did do something.
First things first, let's clear any misconceptions about anything. There's something goes wrong on every interaction, especially of use of force interaction. Something goes wrong every single time. There is something wrong. And from day one, and not ironically proven right by the autopsy, I've always stood by the assertion that nobody, no human being, no animal, I don't care if we're talking about a dog, no living thing deserves to die with another human kneeling on their back. That was horrific to see, horrific to watch. And I don't think any sensible, reasonable adult could debate that. What is for debate is, did George Floyd die because Chauvin was kneeling on his back? No.
No, but he could have called an ambulance for him.
It was horrific to watch. Yeah. You know, if you watch the video, again, unlike Dominic, I'm not an authority on anything. Apparently, he's an authority on everything. I'm not authority on anything. This is just my opinion. But I feel like I speak for enough cops, everybody that's ever dealt with an EDP that doesn't want to get in a car, you know, at that point, if you watch the pushing and pulling, and we've gone through this, and again, I'm sorry if I'm miscounting the number, but I believe it was 8. I could be wrong. From the time that they were trying to stuff George Floyd in the back seat, where one was on one side, and again, any cop that's ever been in that situation, they know it's the you push, I'll pull. One gets on one side, so they're going to push him in, and the other guy's going to pull him in, and we'll close the doors, and he's in. From the time they started that to the time George Floyd was on the ground, he asked 8 times, I'll lay on the ground. I'll go on the ground. I'll go on the ground. Because he said he didn't want to sit in the car because it was, you had claustrophobia.
Well, he was having a heart attack is what was going on realistically.
Yes, he was overdosed.
So here's my question for you. Don't you think police officers in a situation like that have some degree of responsibility to, the guy is clearly, you know, to call an ambulance or do, there was enough time.
No, clearly, and it's clear that they did. Somebody called an ambulance in that time because the ambulance showed up. So I have to believe, and again, could I be wrong? Absolutely. I have to believe at that point you have an overdosing, because Chauvin at some point had to know drugs was involved because that was part of his inappropriate interaction with the group watching, where he said that, you know, let this be a lesson, kids, don't do drugs or something like that. You know, again, part of what, you know, I feel, me personally speaking for just Josh Oliveri, just myself, part of what I feel he did wrong. You already got part of the reason you are on high alert at that point is because you do have a crowd gathering. The last thing you want to do is start jawing with that crowd. You don't need to interact, especially from a lecturing standpoint. So, you know, you have an EDP that's overdosing on drugs, that's voluntarily willing to go on the ground. And part of what you're talking about, yeah, is there is care and custody, right? Once you put handcuffs on somebody, they are your responsibility. And if he, in handcuffs, slips out of your hands and runs down the street and gets hit by a car, your fault, your responsibility. So now if you have this guy that you're having trouble controlling voluntarily going to the ground, you're going to let him go to the ground. You absolutely, you want to lay on the ground, you're going to lay on the ground, because in the back of your head, you're thinking, I got an ambulance coming. When he gets here, we'll deal with loading him into the bus when he gets here. But for now, while I'm waiting on the ambulance, why am I going to fight with this guy anymore when he's voluntarily going to lay on the ground? You know,
and screaming that he can't breathe. I mean, do CPR, do something at that point.
But again, Elon, everybody, again, I don't speak for all cops, but I feel
but like everyone did agree. I have yet to meet a police officer, and I've interviewed a lot of police officers who felt like that was handled properly. Out of every police officer I've talked to.
I've lost track, especially since then, of how many suspects, can't breathe when they're put in handcuffs. But again, he didn't need to be kneeling on his back like, a predator on top of prey. It's a really bad look. It's a really and nobody deserves, I don't care what you're guilty of. And he was guilty of a low-level crime at that time. We're not talking about him putting the gun to the stomach of the pregnant female, which I guess to some people on the left wouldn't matter because the baby doesn't really count as a baby then. So really he's just putting his gun to the stomach of just a female, I guess.
That's an interesting legal, by the way, that is an interesting legal question that I is outside of this podcast.
But I was going to say, that's a rabbit hole. I promised you, I wouldn't hold you all night. So that's a rabbit hole we go down. But yeah, I mean, even that night though, or that day, George Floyd was guilty of a low-level crime. Sure, it could have been handled differently, without a doubt. But my point with all of that was, verbal judo doesn't change.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So Dominic's notion that, verbal judo seems to be underused, and how that applied to the Cantu shooting. I mean, listen, he could be 100% right with the Cantu shooting, and all the questions he was asking relating to that, about why the cop did this, why the cop did that. It falls into this category of, where he was saying these things or asking these questions and then making it like he took a lot of hate because of asking those questions. Cops don't like to be critiqued. First things first, I've said it on your interviews before, and I've said it, on other podcasts that, a good cop, right? A good cop hates nothing more than they hate bad cops, right? That any misconception, or any idea that somebody has otherwise is just nonsense. And this hate that he says he's getting because cops don't want to be criticized or critiqued. There's a difference between criticism and gaslighting. And what he does is gaslighting. When you take an incident that clearly something went wrong on, that there is no debate, there's nothing to even really talk about because you know what went wrong, to focus on that and to harp on that and to keep a spotlight on that, that's throwing gasoline on an already emotional fire. And he's doing that, and people like him do that for their own benefit, for their own relevance. Puts clicks on their page, right? Puts traffic through their social media, because again, this is his life after law enforcement now, right? Since he got fired and successfully sued for his job back just to retire. This is his life, right? He's a few black belts and a firing ahead of, fake Mike the cop, who's the same guy. It's the same mentality. These are guys that did not do full police careers, had questionable activity while they were active duty, and now have turned to social media to be quote unquote authorities on anything, you know. And again, I know I'm trying not to make it about him, but just so we have a context, and I'll skip off of him so
So,
everybody knows who Dominic Izzo is and what his mentality is.
no, I understand that. It just, let's look at the content, because if we just focus too much on him, it'll lose track of. I know he set you off because of some of the
One
stuff.
last thing, and then I'll move off of it. One last thing that I promise.
Your time. I listen. Like
Again,
I said, you guys come on. It's your time. You talk about whatever you want.
it's important to me because, again, and I genuinely mean it, I love the fact that you have differing views on, because you can't preach free speech and then shut people down. Dominic is entitled to his opinion. He could think anything he wants. He's entitled to it. It comes from his perspective. It comes from the way he views things. And I'm entitled to my opinion. And
Yeah.
my opinion is based off of what little I know about him. And the last thing I'll say about him, which people can form their opinions after that on him, back in January, less than 24 hours after NYPD police officers Moore and Rivera were shot, Dominic tweeted. I'll read his tweet because I don't want anybody to be any misquoting, right? This is less than 24 hours after 2 NYPD police officers were shot. One killed, one was still on life support, while his family had to make critical decisions, up to and including harvesting his organs. This is what Dominic, strictly a critical law enforcement professional, had to say. I don't care about the hate I'll get for this, but it's so hard to balance my emotions for the NYPD and their loss after they've spent the last 2 years harassing, abusing, and violating the rights of citizens and acting as enforcers of tyrants. We need to all heal. That's what that piece of shit thought was appropriate while the NYPD was going through what they were going through. So for him to claim that his perspective and the things he says are just being critical, it's not. It's inflammatory to benefit himself. I'd say I promise no more no more on him. So take that from where it's coming.
Let's go back to kind of like the content of the arguments and analyze it from that point of view. Because do you feel, here's my question. Do you feel, because I do agree with you, that tweet is very disgusting after someone was just killed and another person was just shot. And I see that a lot with police haters, where they generalize all police, and then a cop dies and they're like, well, why should I feel bad for a cop when all these cops are out there doing bad things? And it's like, you're taking the actions of a very few number of cops and then saying it's okay for police to die because of this small group of police over here who've done bad things. I could do that with any group of people. I could literally do that with any group of people. That's what I've seen when people hate Muslims. That's the exact same argument they make. You know what I mean? They'll say like, well, they're terrorists. I'm like, well, that person is not a terrorist. You're taking a few terrorists and then generalizing an entire population to say you could do whatever you want to them. It's a messed up mentality. It's not a justifiable mentality to hate on people when they're suffering or dying. But on that note, do you feel that there was an obligation? Let's say this Eric Cantu shooting. This Eric Cantu shooting, this recent shooting, looks pretty rough, in my opinion. I don't think I can't imagine what could come out that would make me feel differently about it, just because there's enough in the video that I just don't see how. There's a couple of these videos that come out where I'm a huge fan of, we don't know the circumstances, we don't know what happened, we don't know anything. But then sometimes there's a video where I'm like, I do not know. It would take really, really, really extreme circumstances for this to somehow become a justified shoot in my head, just because of the series of events that took place. And I understand your point of view. Well, then if everyone agrees it's bad, then why even continue talking about it? Let's just say it's bad and move on. That's fine. But do you feel like there's an obligation of police to let people know, we agree with you, it was bad, we don't want this to happen, let's find solutions, whatever those things are, we can have conversations about these things, but we can't do it in such a depth where it's meant to generalize and hate on all police.
I don't think that cops would say any different. I don't think, again, I mean, an obligation to say that it's bad, I think you get that. I don't think you have cops out there taking the stance that, we can't have discussion on it. So is that necessarily an obligation? I mean, I think it's right to do that. I think it's right
Yeah.
to have that discussion on that obligation or not.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it an obligation. And in the same way as I don't think all Muslim people, every time there's a terrorist attack that's done from a Muslim, are required to go out and apologize for terrorism. You know what I
Right.
mean?
I mean, it's discussion is good. Discussion is always good, and yeah, you can learn from every single incident. In discussion, a public discussion about the event, you know, sometimes works to cool things off. And that goes to where we were talking about, or you guys had talked about the totality of the circumstances, and how quickly that was dismissed was also, and again, not by you, by those we do not speak of. The totality of the circumstances is huge. It is important to have that. If you're going to have a discussion about it, if you want to have that discussion, especially one that involves the public, you do have to have all the circumstances. You can't just talk about, because it is one thing to say, hey, yeah, this was a bad shoot, but to have a real discussion about it, you need to know everything that led up to it. You need to know everything involved. So that to say when he mocked cops for bringing up the totality of the circumstances, first of all, a lot of our job, the overwhelming percentage of our job, especially, interaction with the public, is based on that. When we talk about having discretion, especially, in regards to traffic summonses, totality of the circumstances is huge. It's a lot.
That was a weird comment when he said that. Who cares about the before and after? I'm like, that's the most important thing. Again, I think in some cases, like there's that video of the guy, the police officer who had "you're fucked" written on his gun, and he was like screaming commands at the guy and ended up shooting him. That dude in the hallway. That was just, I don't, again, there's certain ones where I'm like, I don't know how I could justify this. So I fully agree that it's a little bit crazy in many cases to just, and we keep finding out these cases where there's riots that occur because of something, and then we find out the overall details, and you're like, okay, that guy was in someone's house, a pregnant woman's house, to rape her, and had a knife in his car and was going to get it when the cops shot him, even though they shot him in the back. I'm like, I'm sorry. You're walking to get your knife after you've just been called because you're about to rape a pregnant woman in her house who you have a history of abusing, and you get shot in the back for not listening to police officers as you're reaching for a knife. I don't care. You're not the victim. The woman was the victim.
Aaron Dean is a perfect example of the totality of the circumstances. Again, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, in our previous interviews and all that. Again, does somebody deserve to be shot in their own house for addressing what they believe is a predator in their backyard? No, of course not. On face value, there's not a human being that would disagree with that. But then when you look at the totality of the circumstances, is Aaron Dean a murderer? No. And any adult, any reasonable, emotionally uninvolved adult that says otherwise is a lunatic. Because I don't care where you work in wherever the heck USA. If you are searching the perimeter of a home that you believe is being burglarized, and you come around the corner of the outside of the house, and standing at that window is an individual with a handgun pointing at you, you are shooting that person. And again, I'm not an authority because God willing, I've never been involved in a police shooting. So I can't even speak from experience on that. But emotionally, putting myself in that position, searching the home, and again, searching the home in accordance with his own general orders. He was at that house because he was sent there, and he was searching that perimeter based on his own general orders. Fort Worth Police Department has a general order that it's titled Open Doors or something to that effect. And it says that when every open door is to be treated as a silent alarm, and the officer's first obligation is to search the exterior of the premises for avenues of escape before searching the interior. And this notion again, people like Dominic would put out there that, oh, he should have announced himself. I don't know what episodes of Law and Order Dominic pulls that from, or people that subscribe to that mentality pull that from. But if I'm at a house that I believe is actively being burglarized, the last thing I am doing is announcing myself to those burglars. Hey guys, I'm here by myself. If you guys want to run out here, like, you're not doing
No, I
that.
agree. But I think
But there are people that are, well, he never announced himself. What show do you, a TV show, the same one that you believe, where everybody has to, that's right, where you believe that everybody has to be read their rights immediately after being placed under arrest. What TV show do you think you're on? So, to say that kind of stuff, to dismiss that totality of the circumstance, I mean, that is just insane.
The problem is, Josh, that it's still from a civilian standpoint, and I agree with you. Like, sorry, I don't know why my camera's doing this. I'm trying to get it to work. I don't know why this. It worked. Okay,
You're
so
good.
I suppose the issue I have in that is I agree he shouldn't announce himself. I agree the situation is entirely tragic. I agree that he probably, from a technical standpoint, didn't do anything wrong. But still, the idea of a civilian being shot for just being in their house and doing what they're lawfully allowed to do, which is, so if she would have shot him and killed him, it would have been justified as well. She saw a guy in her backyard wearing dark clothes, didn't know who he was, and she shot him because she saw he had a gun. And then,
I agree.
So it's not a healthy situation for anyone when we create those situations, I think, is the argument. What can we, so I think people don't, you're right, we play too much of the blame game. And, so life was lost in this situation. Instead of playing the blame game, we should be looking at what are policies we can put in place that still protect the police officer, but protect civilians. If there was a cop randomly inside my house because someone had said it's burglarized and I have some IKEA stuff here, and I wake up in the middle of the night and I just someone shuffling in my house and then I see a gun out and I shoot that person, that's not good either, right? So there's got to be situations that arise and we can all look at it, police and civilians, and instead of just going after each other, saying, how do we analyze this and make, there's always room for improvement. And I just feel like we don't do that at all.
I think the first thing, right? And I know I've said a lot in regards to the Aaron Dean. The first step in that is accepting that when you are dealing with police officers, you are dealing with humans. And until you don't deal with humans, until you deal with robots, as long as you have humans in a uniform, you will be dealing with the human condition, which is imperfection. You will never have perfection. Now, the stakes are higher because police officers deal literally in life or death sometimes, right? So those stakes are higher. So we need to accept the fact that tragedy is going to happen, right? What happened to Miss Jefferson in Fort Worth is a tragedy. You are 100% right. Had she shot Aaron Dean and killed Aaron Dean, she would have been justified. And that would have been a tragedy. Would Miss Jefferson have been a murderer in that case? No. And as hard as that is emotionally for me to say, I stand by that. And I would stand by that it is absolutely a tragedy. She was in her home with her lawfully owned firearm, addressing what she believed to be a prowler. It is a tragedy, and not every tragedy is a crime.
I agree with you.
I think that's the first step. The second step, the biggest step right now, and again, I know, especially using the Kansu shooting as a springboard, people are going to have a problem with that because there's this whole issue of, submissiveness. You do not have the legal right to resist arrest. You do not have the legal right to disregard law enforcement orders. You can disagree with why they're there. You can disagree with the whole situation. There is a process to fight that. You might not like that process. Those wheels might grind a lot slower than you like, but there is a process to deal with that. Resisting arrest, ignoring police orders is not part of that process. And I think, my feeling again, that too much of police resistance, resisting arrest, defying police orders is being, praised, is being
I agree with that too.
and that's raising the stakes now.
Of
You have
course.
so much defiance, and I could tell you just on simple traffic stops, you have so much defiance. Again, for me, personal experience. I got a guy who's refusing to give me any of his documentation, won't give any of it to me. Now I'm telling him, I'm trying, right? Getting back to the verbal judo that Dominic wanted to reference. I promised I wasn't going to talk about it. I'm not. Using the verbal judo, and trying to tell this guy, like, bro, listen, this is a traffic stop. Don't make it more than it has to be. It's a beautiful day. We could be done here in 5 minutes. Going, having a whole conversation, right? And I'm telling him, like, this is arrestable. Like, I've already asked you twice at this point. It's arrestable. You're refusing to cooperate. You're refusing to give me the documents that I'm requesting lawfully on this traffic stop. You are now hindering. You are now obstructing justice here. You're like, it's arrestable. Don't make me do this. Well, don't go. He still persists, right? So now he's got to come out of the car. Before coming out of the car, he looks at me and says, is this really a road you want to go down? And I had looked over my shoulder and I'm like, oh shit, you are talking to me. Like, but this is the mentality that's out there. And that is dangerous. And guys, men, women, parents are doing this in front of their kids. And what are those kids learning? They're learning that this is okay. People are doing this in front of their kids. Their kids are seeing this is now becoming learned behavior that, well, if the cop is telling me to stop, fuck them. I'm just not going to stop. And you're seeing it with this car theft ring that's operating out of Newark. They just locked a kid up there at 14 years old. These are babies that are fleeing traffic stops, hitting cops. They hit one of our guys at the Holland Tunnel a week ago, ran a cop over just to get away. These are babies. Where are they learning that that's okay? And what's going to happen, right? This 14-year-old kid at some point is going to run into a cop, literally run into a cop with his car. He's going to get shot. And then all of a sudden, the 8th grade graduation pictures are going to show up. And they're going to talk about my poor baby who wanted to be an astronaut. Well, where did your poor baby learn that it was okay to run a cop over in a stolen car?
There's definitely a societal issue right now with responsibility and how we perceive police and everything. Although the case with I didn't see that personally in the Eric Cantu case. I saw a kid sitting in his car eating his food and then seeing his door get ripped open by a guy with a gun who's suddenly pointing it or grabbing within seconds. Like, I mean, I also look at just, in years of teaching self-defense and teaching adrenal stress responses and how people react when they're under a lot of stress. They don't react well. It's very easy to, because so I'm a huge fan of, like, listen to police, right? I'm the biggest advocate of this, but I'm also a fan of police understanding that when you're yelling at a command at someone and your firearm is drawn and they're not guilty of a crime and they've been exposed to police will kill you, police will kill you, police will kill you, and their adrenaline is running through their body, they're not going to respond perfectly every time also. And so we do have a societal obligation to stop making people so scared of police so that it doesn't escalate to that point. Like you said, that would be a great step. Let's not let it get to the point where the cop has to pull out his gun on you because you're yelling at him or resisting arrest or whatever that thing may be. But in the case, there are, and like you said, there are some cases like the Eric Cantu case, that case with the guy who had "you're fucked" written on his gun. Even the case with Philando Castile, where I felt like he literally notified the police officer, hey, I have a gun. It's legally owned. I'm going to take it out and give it to you. And the cop's like, take it out, and then shoots him for reaching for his gun.
Right.
I mean, but I guess, like you said, there are these very isolated. The thing that I always tell people is, because I always tell people, I'm like, I'll be the most critical person of police when they do something like that. But the reality is, I can count the amount of times that has happened on my hands. And that's over the span of 15 years. So to pretend like this is
say that again louder for the people. That is the huge. You can finish your point, but
that's what I'm saying. I know their names. I know Philando Castile's name. I know Eric Cantu's name. Like, so I can talk I can analyze it in at least a way that's rational and say those cases were a problem, but they're not the norm. They're not the majority. They're the same thing as getting struck by lightning.
I
So
I I agree 1,000%, and I think that that conversation and yeah, I mean, perhaps cops wouldn't have such an issue being criticized or people being critical of them if there also was a balance. Um, Somebody that took a lot of shit back in the day for his outspoken criticism of law enforcement in America was John Stewart, and John Stewart said something a simple yet profound. I mean, anybody inside of civil service, not just law enforcement, but all civil service knows there's nobody more supportive, especially through his work with the 9/11 bill. And there's nobody more supportive of civil servants than John Stewart. And half in joke and half not in joke when somebody was busting his chops about some of the stuff, basically saying, hey, listen, you have this platform, you have an obligation, not everybody knows some of what you're saying is satire. They're taking everything that you're saying verbatim, and it's basically giving him a hard time at his criticism of police. He said, it is possible to be both critical and supportive at the same time, which again, simple but profound. And I think, if that were the case, I think a lot of cops would have less of a hard time taking that criticism from people. If we were going to look at a case that is clearly wrong and analyze as, okay, you know what, that's fine. If in the rest of the time you were out, just like you had said, if you're praising cops for everything that they do right in all of your other time, and then being critical of these incidents, these few incidents that go wrong, these less than 1% of these incidents that go wrong, I think that would be good. But when you're critical of police, and then you're somebody like the executive vice president of Robert Wood Johnson, Micheline Davis, who on her own Facebook this is going now, I think 2000, it's going back. I'm going to say maybe 18. I might be wrong on that. It might be 17. Where she, on her Fair Lawn Board of Education, had hired retired police officers to be SROs. At the time, great idea, right? What better way to protect our most valuable asset, our children, than to have retired police officers who can be armed in the schools, and unsolicited, unprovoked, Micheline Davis, using her personal Facebook where she advertises herself as the executive vice president of Robert Wood Johnson, says under that story that was posted, a news story, who's going to train them to not shoot the black children first? Now, how do you sit across the table from somebody like that and have a genuine discussion about an incident that she feels went wrong when you already know that her instinct is to believe that police officers are so ingrained to shoot black children that they actually need to be trained to not? How do you have a discussion with that? And I think that's where that disconnect comes in, and why police officers are so raw. Unlike what Dominic said, they're not resistant to criticism. They're raw from unjust criticism. We're exhausted from it. Somewhere in my oath, I must have given up my presumption of innocence and just not aware of it. We are still, as civil servants, we are still citizens of the United States. I know citizenship is a big deal and a taboo subject with everybody. We are still citizens of the United States, and as such, we are entitled to the presumption of innocence. And that presumption of innocence has been stripped from police officers. So you say, talk about the discussion and the criticism about, and analyzing. I think cops would be more open to that if we had that presumption of innocence. If there was less nonsense entertained, less false narratives entertained, if a lot more of that was shot down and a lot more of that was debunked and treated as just garbage, I think you would see cops being more, all right, yeah, you know what? Let's talk about this. Let's sit and have a town hall about this shooting, because every other day of the week, we're all out there, getting along with no issues. This is not, there is accountability that has to be raised. That bar has to be raised on both sides. I think that's the real umbrella answer, to what changes. How do we turn that corner? You can expect more from your police officers, but your police officers should be able to expect more from you. I think that's the big thing, and that's there to disconnect.
I agree. It's symbiotic. It benefits everyone.
Everybody wants police. Yeah.
No, I never understand why people are like, well, it's their job, they should do this. I'm like, it's a symbiotic relationship.
Yes.
It's like we live in an ecosystem. There's social interactions that take place. It's on you too, whether you want to admit it or not. Like when something bad happens, you can deny that you have a part to play in it, but we all have a part to play in how things turn out. The notion that it's just 100% on officers is ridiculous. We as a society have to change. So
ridiculous, but accepted.
It's accepted as the norm now.
That's what's going on now. That's the disconnect. It is ridiculous, but it is it not only accepted, it's expected.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that disconnect. You have to do better. I don't. Everybody wants body cameras. I love the idea. Let's all wear body cameras. And I think what should go hand in hand in that, because you see all these cases that come out with people that report one thing, and then the body cam footage comes out, and it's something totally different.
I agree.
I think
body
in those
cam
cases,
police officers just as much as I've even done it. I've even recorded arrests, and the cops like other arrests, and the cops like, "Why are you filming?" I'm like, "I'm filming just as much to protect you as I am him, buddy." I'm like, "I'm a supporter of police. I'm recording this because it can help either one of you. I'll just as equally put out the information one way or the other. I want to make sure you are protected." And they're like, "Okay."
And I think anybody advocating for cops wearing body cameras should be willing to say, as part of that, then we're going to say, anybody who, if you want to advocate for wearing a body camera, that's fine. But if you file an allegation against my police officer and I produce body cam footage that refutes that allegation, you're going to be charged with a crime.
I agree with that. Or at least you should be civilly responsible for defamation or something like that. You should be held accountable if you make a blatantly false claim against an officer. Let's say that, because you can ruin their career, you can ruin their life, the same as any false allegation. That is by definition defamation.
Of course, because the allegation is everything. Because even if you get that off, you'll just be that cop that got that off. You'll never be, once you're accused, you'll never be fully exonerated. You'll just be the guy they couldn't prove guilty.
I agree fully.
So you are 100% right for that. It's
all right. We went long, Josh. Hopefully people
we did go long. Listen, one last thing about Dominic, if I can.
Oh no, we can't go back.
We can. Part of what we do with the charity too, we have a podcast. We've been out of the cycle for a little bit because our headquarters is getting redone. But we're gonna be back up and running soon, probably over the winter. By the spring, the latest, the Blue Room podcast. I am offering now to Dominic Izzo. I'm inviting you on the podcast. I want him to come on our podcast. I want him in studio. You could come to Phillipsburg, New Jersey, and be in studio. I want him to be a guest. Again, genuine discussion. We're not going to be any Pearl Harboring going on. Genuine discussion. We'll give him his platform, and we'll let him hear our stance on his platform. Again, we can't preach free speech if we're not willing to hear both sides. So listen, Joshua at brothersbeforeothers.org. Shoot me an email.
I'll make sure I'll pass it on to him.
And we will set it up. He will be our inaugural welcome back show with Dominic Izzo. He can wear his fancy 3-piece suits. Our microphones might not be as fancy as his. Our hair might not be as bleached as his. And I may not have gotten fired by that point. But hopefully I have enough qualifications to ask him a few questions. Elon,
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're
That
welcome.
honestly, for anybody, you talk about our charity, um, you know, people like you, not just in supporting us as a charity, but supporting civil servants in general, the work that you're doing, and the personal sacrifice that entails. People don't realize, the shit that you take for the stance that you take. It's not easy, and to see that done with somebody who has so much, or by somebody that has so much to lose. You're not a billion-dollar corporation who could take a stance, and not even really feel it. Every little bit of business that is either generated or lost by your stance is felt by you. So for you to take that stance is huge. And to the people that know better, it means the world. So don't thank me, thank you. Anybody looking for a watch, there it is. Listen,
Thank
I'm
you,
telling
brother.
you, it is thank you for what you do. Except having Dominic on. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for watching, everyone. And I'll make sure Dominic gets the message.
Excellent.